Coogs House. All right, we got an exciting basketball game against Tulane tonight. Did I read that right? Tulane's good. We're going to have an exciting game tonight. Let's break it all down.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater going to stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below that we can get us in your news feed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome to the YouTube channel. Good to see you again. Looks like we're up over 425 subscribers. That number is climbing up quickly. Remember, at 25, Sparkle and I will be giving away a nice little gift package to people that are commenting on videos. So make sure we're entered on that. We need to make sure we get to 500 subscribers. So hit subscribe if you haven't already. And then be commenting in the videos, join the conversation. If after hearing all about the Tulane basketball game tonight, you are not up for that, don't have anything else to say, tell us whether or not you put salsa on the outside of your burrito. All right, so tonight is a big Tulane matchup. I don't get to say that about basketball very often. So we're going to kind of break down in our first segment how their season has gone, give a little scouting report on the, I would say the Green Wave, on the Tulane Green Wave. In the second segment, we're going to look at some matchups and kind of see where I think Houston can exploit some things. And then that third segment, we'll look at a little bit of a preview of the game, a little bit of what could come afterwards. So first, let's jump into what Tulane looks like so far. Going into tonight's game, Tulane is 12-5 in their fourth season under Ron Hunter. Ron Hunter, that's a name sounds familiar. And it's not just because he's been at Tulane for a handful of seasons. He was the IUPUI coach from the famous March Madness moment that you see on all the montages where after they win their conference tournament in 2003, he goes out and kisses the midcourt line and in celebration. That team actually wasn't as strong as a later team of his at IUPUI that would have George Hill. Not to go down a tangent on Ron Hunter, but he's had some pretty good programs at small places. So it makes sense that in year 4, he's built Tulane up again, 12-5, 5-1 in the AAC. On the season as a whole, their only AAC loss has been Cincinnati. Obviously, Cincinnati is one of the top end teams in the American. We saw Houston had a fairly tough contest for most of the night with them. I guess it was a daytime game with them. But Tulane has beaten Memphis. They beat Tulsa. They won at Temple, at SMU, and they beat Central Florida in their building over the weekend. And I think I say all that to say that that's a fairly impressive slate for a team like Tulane that didn't have a single Power 5 non-conference game. As far as looking at their non-conference games goes, they did have a couple of common opponents. McNeese State, Tulane won by 17. He's won by a little more than that, whatever. I thought it was interesting. They lost to Nevada, Western Kentucky, Fordham, and George Mason. So no Power 5 teams in that non-conference schedule for Tulane. But I'd imagine between George Mason and Western Kentucky, you might get another tournament team or two out of them in those kind of smaller conferences. I thought it was interesting watching them play. I'll talk more about the X's and O's in a second. But statistically speaking, too, they're an extremely low turnover team. They're 11th lowest turnovers on the season in the entire NCAA Division I college basketball. And so they take good care of the basketball. Ron Hunter's doing a really, really good job with them. News and notes on it. They also have been advertising it since Sunday. The stadium is sold out. They're welcoming the number 1 team in the country into their gym there in, Greater New Orleans area. And they're excited about it. I'd imagine you'll see some special uniform. They leaked a Mardi Gras uniform. I don't know if they'll wear that on this Tuesday because it's not quite fat. I don't know. They leaked a Mardi Gras uniform. See if they wear on Tuesday. I imagine it's something special and hyped and that kind of all the crowd going crazy and kind of things. They're led by 2 key guards. It's a very guard-centric offense. Stop me if you've heard that before on the Houston Cougars show. But their guards are both an last year all-conference performer, Jalen Cook, and last week's American Athletic Conference Player of the Week, Jaylen Forbes. Those guys both get 18 and 19 points per game, respectively. For a team that plays at a relatively slow pace, I would comment that that's pretty impressive, right? They don't turn the ball over. They have long possessions and they get good shots. And that's, that's their MO. That's how they've gotten to 12-5 on the season. They've had kind of this surprise run in the American. I think people weren't, necessarily picking them to win a whole lot of games. They got a fairly difficult schedule. They got home and home with Houston, home and home with Memphis, home and home with Cincinnati. And people are like, oh man, like that's a tough schedule. And you factor in like Central Florida's got a pro and all these kinds of things. Needless to say that they've handled that very, very well. And I'm wondering, obviously I think Houston wins a game. We'll get more into that later. I'm wondering if they have a good showing, if they kind of spark up as like, oh, could they be the second best team in the American kind of spot? I don't know if it's going to be Cincinnati or Central Florida or Memphis or Tulane, but I do think that they're all kind of vying that same atmosphere. Whereas admittedly a month ago when we were talking about like, what did I think would be difficult conference games? I didn't have Tulane on there. Not that I didn't remember that they had Jalen Cook, again, an all-American Athletic Conference guy from a year ago. I was like, if he's on his own, like we got Jamal Shead and Marcus Sasser, we're okay, right? Jaylen Forbes is a junior, so I don't guess he came out of nowhere, but it is a little bit different to see him shoot the ball so well this year. Anyway, we'll get into the matchups in a second, but I think that their season has been somewhat of a surprise in conference play. And frankly, it kind of means Houston's in this, like, no-win situation. They're going to either beat Tulane, and it's like, okay, you beat Tulane, cool, guys, or they don't, and it's like, oh my God, how'd you lose to Tulane, right? That's a no-win situation for Houston as they enter this. And that's not great to have at the top of your scouting report. As I look up and down at their team, I think what's interesting is they're built similarly to Houston. They might be slightly bigger at one guard spot, but slightly smaller at one forward spot. And that to me is, an important thing for Houston because we saw them have trouble with South Florida trying to collapse on the big fella, right? And that led to a lot of open threes. We saw them have trouble with the length of Alabama's second unit, honestly, in the Alabama game. They ended up shooting them out of the zone, but Nafali Dante and Oregon did it too, honestly. There's been moments where size has given Houston issues. They don't have that. I will say that they're going to have an exciting home crowd and that they, quite bluntly, aren't as bad as I think people are anticipating. If I look at their like Ken Palm stuff, they're kind of top third of college basketball as far as like the entirety of Division I goes. And I think that's the kind of team where like if you're not playing well and they're at home, they might beat you. They'd run fairly simple sets. They run a lot of, it's kind of like we saw in Tulsa, a lot of dribble handoffs from the edge till eventually they get someone rolling to the basket. In Tulsa, that was Silabunge. In this game against Tulane, I imagine that's going to probably be Kevin Cross, although I did see some out of Cian James. So we'll see kind of how they go out of that. Several of the games that they've won, they kind of had upsets in. They shot well above their heads from three-point land, and that's kind of been the last handful of games. So if they're shooting that well again, Houston could have some problems. We saw them have problems with South Florida just last week, right? And so I'm going to tell you how Houston's built to win this game and where their matchups are in a moment in the next segment. Kind of go through position by position how they match up. But first, let's talk a little bit about Built Bar. Now, Built Bar is one of my favorite reads because well before Locked On Coogs was a show and well before Locked On Coogs was a member of the Locked On Podcast Network, it was the thing I used the most out of all the things that help bring our show to you. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, then you've got to have a Built Bar. Just go through the holidays. I know my goal is to eat a little bit healthier. I promise. I know you see the chicken wings and stuff like that on my Instagram stories. I promise I'm trying to get healthier. But you don't want to compromise taste. You got to try Built Bar. Built Bar is a healthy and actually tasty alternative. It's so good because it's covered in 100% real chocolate. They have unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but the bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. They're healthy at just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. You don't want to wait around to get a box? No worries. I've been telling you for a long time to go to Built.com, but now you can go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Yep, that's right. You can go to Walmart today, go to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can grab a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or Cocoa Puffs. If you're in Sam's Club, you can go get a 13-bar box of some of their hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later for those. My favorite bar, though, is that chocolate almond. I'm a big Almond Joy guy. That was kind of my candy as a kid. who am I kidding? It's my candy now. And the coconut almonds taste a lot like an Almond Joy, and that's going to be my recommendation to you. And my recommendation is to go get a Built Bar at Walmart, Sam's Club, or at Built.com today. All right, so as we look at all of this, the matchups thing are really, really key here because I mentioned in the first segment that they're set up fairly similarly to how Houston is set up. They've got a couple of really great guards, and those guys kind of have the ability to take off and give you a game, right? The same way you saw Sasser give Houston the South Florida game. Jamal Cook and Jaylen Forbes can do that. They have the capability to do that, and if Houston's not careful, they could have that done to them. So Jalen Cook is a sophomore guard, 6 foot, 205 pounds. Last year's he was all conference. He's also his COVID freshman year, so it doesn't really count. He was on the LSU Tigers, so he was a Power 5 caliber guy coming out of high school. He has 18.3 points per game on a 48% effective field goal percentage that factors in a little bit bonus for threes. He's also getting 4.7 assists per game as a true point guard. I imagine this draws the Jamal Shead matchup. Memphis did a really good job of making him turn it over. As little as they've turned it over this season, Memphis was able to speed him up. I'm anticipating Jamal Shead doing the same. That said, Jalen Cook is a really, really good finisher on the break. So when he breaks away from Jamal Shead, we're going to need to have long arms and bodies at the rim to kind of help deter him and defer him because he is crafty once he gets in the air on the break. He doesn't do that kind of stuff necessarily in the half court as much as far as the ups and unders and dipsy-doos, but he does get out on the break and move it. Their two guard, Jaylen Forbes, 6'5", 185. He was last week's conference player of the week, 19.2 points per game, shooting the ball 39% from three, shooting 91.7% from the free throw line, so you don't want to foul him. He was the only top 100 recruit on their roster as far as recruit rankings go, if you buy into all that. He's a crazy catch and shoot threat. I mentioned the 39% from three, but he also does it from the mid-range. He's springing if you overcommit on the closeout. He gets up and finishes through contact well, and then he add in the free throw percentage. He's a really, really tough scorer and their leading scorer. I know that typically means at the guard spot that the Marcus Sasser matchup, with his length and him being 6'5", I actually think it's the Tramon Mark matchup. He might get some more of Ramon Walker. We should mention Ramon Walker did travel with the team, it looks like, by all things on the accounts. And so I think that's a good sign. But I think he will, at least in the starting lineup, draw the Tramon Mark matchup because he's just so long. And frankly, that kind of lets Sasser roam a little bit. That doesn't mean that there won't be possessions and key moments and stretches of the game if it comes down to those key moments and stretches that Marcus Sasser couldn't mark him. We saw in the South Florida game that at the end of the game, Kelvin Sampson just said, I want to put Marcus Sasser on their best player, right? And that's how he went about it. So that could happen with either of these guards for Marcus. But I imagine the start of the game, you see Tramon Mark just to make sure we have someone in his face that's the length to get up in his face and keep up with him and those kinds of things. He's a rangy guy. The guy I see Marcus Sasser matching up with is RJ McGee. Now, that's a 6'5", 205-pound, more like thick-bodied type. But he's just averaging 4.1 points per game, and he's just getting 16.4 minutes per game. He's kind of rotating in at that fifth starter spot for them, and so I imagine it's a little bit more, it allows Marcus to take more control of the offense, a little bit lesser defensive role, but B, the guys that rotate through that spot will be a handful of guards and wings, and that'll kind of be guys that Marcus can guard as well. I know he's 6'5", 205, and someone's like, Parker, that's probably too big for me. But I think he can handle it. Sasser's got a big, broad chest. And again, I like Tramon Mark's length on Forbes at the other spot. Everyone wants to know who Jarace Walker's guarding. Jarace Walker was obviously not healthy last week. It's good to see him back. He had 103 temperature about this time a week ago. And so it's good to see him back on the floor. All understanding from Sampson talking before during the week and him getting on the plane, that kind of stuff, that Walker is 100% healthy and ready to play. Sounds like he got over whatever bug had gotten him. I imagine he's covering Sion James. Sion's a 6'5", 185-pound, listed as a forward. And he, as far as the two forwards go, he's much more of like a grimy, mudblood kind of guy as far as what Sampson would say. He's got 10.9 points per game on 50% shooting. He does shoot the ball from three-point land at 36%, but he's only shooting about a shot and a half a game from out that far away, so small sample size there. He's getting 10.9 points per game on just 7 field goal attempts because it's a lot of putbacks, and I think I trust Jarace to make sure he stays down around the rim doing that kind of stuff. And I think also like keeping Jarace down on the rim will help him defend the rim in a way that is, beneficial to everyone on the floor. Plus, this is the 6'5" forward of the two forwards, and Jarace can kind of keep up with smaller guys in a way that most forwards in college basketball, let alone the city of Houston, can't, right? Jawan Roberts is left then for Kevin Cross. Kevin Cross is a 6'8" junior, 240 pounds, big, strong guy. I don't have a wingspan listed, but it's definitely in the positive range. He's long arms. 14.6 points per game, 51% shooting, just shooting 10.5 shots. Again, it's a lot of close range shots from Kevin Cross. He, same kind of thing as Sion James, where he'll shoot at a relatively decent percentage from three, but he's not getting a lot of attempts, so I wouldn't put a lot of weight in that. I think what's interesting about Kevin Cross in their offense is he's got the second most assists per game on the team at 4. At the dunker spot, he can catch and power dribble, get to the rim. At the nail, he can do the same thing. But from both spots, he does a great job of seeing the whole floor and getting a quick rotation. I thought in watching 2 games and some highlights from others on him, what was fascinating to me about Kevin Cross was I thought he had better ball dribble moves and those kinds of things when he caught the ball at 25 feet than when he was like catching it more like at 6 or 7 feet. Like from 6 and 7 feet, it's like a 2 dribbles and score, 1 dribble, pass, no dribble, pass. Not a lot of mid-range jump shots, but like very quick, decisive things. From 25 feet, he actually had a little bit more fluidity to his game. He wasn't pulling up from 3, but like a little more fluidity in the rim. I think Jawan Roberts covers him though, because frankly, he's got that like extra weight to him. And that kind of leads to like more of a mucky, muddy kind of game. And the way that we've heard Sampson comment, Jarace does have struggles with. Jarace is a true teenager. Again, 19 years old. I don't think that's anything to worry about long term. I just think if I'm picking one of our starters, I'm going to go with Roberts there. In running this offense, I'll get to the subs in a second. What's interesting to me is the reason I think Cross leads them in assists so much is because they're running the same 5-out weave that we saw Tulsa do. So go back and watch that tape if you know what I'm talking about. But eventually someone pops on a roll after they've it's like screen, slip, and it's like boom, right? Slips the run. He's done a great job of hitting the slip where the big man in Tulsa Selbenge, he was the guy doing the slip to catch dunks. Kevin Cross is doing a great job of like 2 dribbles across the top and then boom, hits the backdoor cut. 2 dribbles across the top, squares up and reverse the ball back for an open 3, right? Like he's doing a great job with those kinds of things. And when he slips, he is very clearly and demonstratively either he's going to the basket or he's going to the short roll to create for others. So it's not like any hesitancy on which one he's doing. And so Jawan Roberts, being a smart veteran player, I think covers that up fairly well. It's an interesting offense that I think relies a lot on what Kevin Cross brings. And then obviously it spreads out the floor for both Forbes and Cook. They're 2 all-everything kind of guards to get to the basket when they want to. They're dangerous, those backcourt guys. If you're looking at who they bring in off the bench, Colin Holloway's a 6'6" junior, getting about 19 minutes per game. He started 7 games this season as well. 8.7 points. I think he and Tylen Pope are the 2 subs I got down, and they're both of the same note and bullet point. Jack of all trades, master of none. I mean, they do several things well, but nothing so crazy well that they like come off the scouting report as a whole, which is probably why they're not starters. I do think one thing that could concern Houston, and one thing I would like to keep an eye on, is both of their key subs to me are these 6'6", 220-pound guys. That means you should see a big day out of the subs for us out of Javier Francis. You can see a big day out of Reggie Chaney, right? I imagine Emmanuel Sharp comes in because he's a little more thick-bodied as opposed to Terrence Arsenault. I wonder if Ramon Walker gets in this game, both because he made the trip and he's supposed to be healthy and he was going through a lot, and I hope he's through it. But I think that this is the kind of game where his tenacity and intensity could play a factor if he's ready to roll, right? Because those are spots where like Houston's not necessarily shorter, but those guys are big, right? And that could give Houston some problems. On the whole, the way those guys play defense, the ball seems to get inside of the like 15-foot area pretty easily against them. Drop-offs to like big fellas were big in the Memphis game. Memphis able to do that pretty efficiently throughout the entire game. And that makes me think this is kind of a Jawan Roberts kind of game, right? Like the kind of game where he could really take off and get his 24-point kind of night. He hadn't had one of those yet this year. And also, we saw in South Florida, he got in foul trouble early and hadn't played a game in like a week, right? And so we'll see how that goes. But that's how I imagine they do that. If Tulane does something crazy and they collapse and take that away because we got to take something away, I'd imagine you see kickouts for threes. That's where you could see Sasser kickouts. That's where you could see Walker kickouts. That's those Tramon Mark. I also wonder if, because Memphis it would get to the mid-range and drop it off, could you see them say, we're taking away the drop-off, in which, if you remind, not to keep going back to the Tulsa game, but in that game, Houston was able to get to that mid-range spot and just pull up. You saw Tramon Mark and Marcus Sasser and Jamal Shead make a bunch of mid-range pull-ups off the dribble because the bigs for Tulsa wouldn't come off the block to help. Well, honestly, analytically, that's a great defense. You're keeping them to a contested mid-range jump shot. Houston just made them. If I'm Tulane, I'm like, what are the odds they make them twice? Right? Like, what are the odds they make them twice? Plus, this is on the road in a hostile gym. Right? Like those are, I guess, what I would be bouncing on if I were them. Cincinnati had a lot of success getting to those elbows in the nail, and Cincinnati is the only team in the conference that's beaten them so far. So maybe worth pointing out that that's kind of a game plan on how to do it. What Houston's defense is going to have to do is react to the kick out threes for catch and shoot, because once guys penetrate off of this weave thing, that's really been how they've beaten teams in the last couple weeks. And we've seen, frankly, Kelvin Sampson gets really, really frustrated on fouling jump shooters overreacting to catch and shoot. So it'll be interesting how those closeouts work and how Houston's youth reacts to a constant drive and kick offense out of that weave initiation. We'll see. We'll see. I will say if they're shooting the ball really, really well, Houston's got to kind of respond with their own offense. I think they can, and we'll get into my predictions the next segment, but that could be a problem if they shoot the ball as well as they have the last couple games from three. On the season, they're shooting very middle of the pack Division I from three. The last 2 or 3 weeks, they've shot very, very well. And so you got to make sure we react and cover up those drive and kick threes, catch and shoot threes without fouling. And Houston's shown an issue with that, especially with some of the young guys the last couple weeks. So in my last segment here, what I want to talk about is my prediction and then what comes out of that. My prediction here is that Juwan Roberts has a good game, Tramon Mark has a big game, and those guys each getting between the 16 to 24 range, with Sasser getting his 10, 12, 14, with Jamal Shead getting his 10, 12, 14. Jarace Walker coming back from health stuff, I don't necessarily want to pick yet, but I will say athletically, he'll be the best athlete in the gym by a long shot. So it turns into that kind of track meet. Maybe I'm wrong, and it's his kind of show. We've seen it happen in conference games before. I think Houston wins by like 17 or 18 points. I'm predicting a high-scoring game because as I look at their games, they've had a lot of high-scoring games. But I'm thinking Houston wins like 84 to 67, right? That's, again, Houston giving up more points than they have traditionally thus far. And that's a lot of points for the kind of slow pace that Tulane and Houston both kind of want to play. But when Tulane played Southern Methodist, SMU, it was 97 to 88. When they played Memphis, it was 96 to 89. When they played Tulsa, it was 93 to 77. When they played Temple, it was 87 to 77. Like, while they play at such a slow pace, because they're not turning the ball over, score a lot of points. I wonder if that's kind of just what's going to happen. This is going to be a lot of points scored. I do think Houston turns them over more, and I think that's why Houston ends up winning by double digits. But the reality of that is that that's kind of, on par for the course for the Houston Cougars, right? As far as what comes out of this win, Houston has to go and play another road game this weekend, playing against Temple, if my schedule serves me correctly. Let me double check to be sure. But yes, they go. They host Temple. I'm sorry, next weekend, 3:00 for Tita Center. Go do it. But looking at what the game's impact could be as a whole, I think we're approaching the part of the season that could be hard to swallow for Houston Cougar fans, where Houston could go 2-0 with fairly decisive victories this week, both against Tulane and Temple, and actually fall from the number 1 seed. So on Monday, Houston was ranked number 1 overall again by the AP poll, and they're number 1 on the net, the net stats, the KenPoms, all the things, all the different ones, right? AP poll ranks number 1. That feels important. But Kansas is number 2, and they play number 14 Kansas State and number 21 Baylor this week, right? Number 3 Purdue just beat Michigan State. They play Minnesota later this week. UCLA plays Arizona, and number 11 Arizona State. They play at Arizona State and at number 11 Arizona, both this week, both on the road. Alabama plays Vanderbilt, who feels like a pushover, but also just beat Tennessee and Missouri this week. The Zags have a similar schedule as far as Houston goes. What I'm getting at here, though, is that there's a chance that Houston could lose points in the AP poll because Kansas has more impressive wins. Now, you only get to play who you lined up against, right? I'm not saying that Houston can do anything about that, but I am saying it's interesting that we're kind of getting to that point in the year where outsiders are expecting Houston to go undefeated in the American Conference, and I'd like to see it happen. I'm not going to cheer against it, but I'm just not betting on it happening. I think there's some really good basketball teams in this conference, and it's really hard to win all of your conference games. Meanwhile, if Houston does win both games this week, it's going to be hard to compare Tulane and Temple to Kansas State and Baylor, right? Does Houston make the appropriate adjustments and win the games like they should? Yes, I think they do in both games. Spoiler alert, I think they win both games. But the average person's going to see a 14 next to Kansas State and a 21 next to Baylor and see those are ranked teams. Those are more impressive victories, right? And they probably are, right? Baylor has a guy that's going to be a top 5 pick, and Kansas State's doing great, and Big 12's tough. We'll see next year and win the whole thing then. But the other part of this is that doesn't happen this week. Next week is the SEC Big 12 Challenge. So if Houston were to somehow still hold on the number 1 seed next week, they kind of face the same exact dilemma where Houston plays Central Florida at Central Florida on a Wednesday and Cincinnati on a Saturday. And that's as tough a 2-game stretch as you can get in the American Conference, really, right? Tulane and Memphis are both very good, but Cincinnati is strong. We saw that on the road earlier this season. And Central Florida has, again, a lottery pick, a pro, right? But while Houston's doing the tough stretch of their season, those two teams, you'll have Bama playing Oklahoma. You'll have Arkansas playing Baylor. In the KU matchup, you got Kentucky versus Kansas, blue blood on blue blood. You've got Texas versus Tennessee, the UT matchup, right? Those kinds of top 10, 15, 25 matchups are going to weigh so much heavier in AP voters' minds that Houston could go undefeated all the way through this thing. And that will sit heavier in some people's heads for whatever reason. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying as a fan, you and I need to protect ourselves or get ready for okay, we're going to go undefeated and get pissed when they put us not number 1 overall for no freaking reason. That said, Sampson said it. I'm saying it. The goal is not to be number 1 right now, although it's nice. The goal is to be number 1 come April, right? When they're holding up trophies in NRG Stadium, the goal is to be number 1 right then. Now, with that said, we'll be following it all the way between now and then, and hopefully talking about being number 1 a handful of times too here on Locked On Cougs. Make sure you subscribe down below. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Be Real, TikTok, all the social media handles at Painsworth5, just PAINSWORTH 512 on Twitter, Instagram, and everything. I'll be talking all things Houston Cougars football, basketball. We can talk Rockets. We can top of the Astros. Who are the Texans going to draft? It sounds like CJ Stroud's going to be available. We'll see what happens there. All those kinds of things at Painsworth 512. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, I'm going to recommend my good buddy Andy Patton. He's got Isaac on every single day on Locked On College Basketball, a national college basketball show. Very Coug friendly too. They're a fan of the Cougs as well. So make sure you go check them out at Locked On College Basketball for your second listen. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Locked On Cougs, a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That's your team, in our case, the number 1 team in the country. Every day, go Cougs.